If you're into long exposures at midnight, you're either a dodgy pervert or a skillful photographer. It will come as a relief to many that Daniel Taylor falls into the latter category. It is a mark of Mr. Taylor's robust iconoclasm that he measures his time in Hamilton against memories of smoking inside Chartwell Square. Judging by the rise in excise duties in last week's budget, that kind of nostalgic reverie will soon get folk arrested. In any case, it is milk, not tobacco, that could be said to be the man's first love. Dairy of a celestial variety, that is. Raglan's perspective on the Milky Way beguiled Daniel as a 7-year-old, and he's been gazing at the stars ever since, although not continuously. Daniel Taylor.
Somewhere between an art and a science, astrophotography involves capturing images of things in the night sky. You might think you'd need expensive equipment or specialist training to take pictures like these, and for some you do. But I'm going to show you what's possible with just an entry-level DSLR camera. If you were an early portrait photographer, you might have given your subjects a posing stand to help keep them still while you took their photo. Your camera wasn't very sensitive, so it took time for the light to slowly build up the image. Astrophotography has the same problem of needing long exposures. It's a bit like an early portrait session gone wrong, a really dim subject that keeps moving during the photos. The night sky revolves around an imaginary point. It's a satellite passing that point on the right. This movement is great if you want to capture star trails like this, but for every other photo, we need a way of freezing the movement while still getting an adequate exposure. There are a few ways you can do this, but if you're wealthy enough to afford a camera, you've probably got a much bigger problem to tackle first. For nearly all of history, we could gaze into a night sky filled with tens of thousands of stars. Then in the 19th century, the light bulb hit the market. Fast forward 134 years, and for the first time ever, dark night skies are becoming an extinct phenomenon. Today, true darkness has virtually gone from the entire continent of Europe. Only the Scottish Highlands are still holding out. For most other Europeans, their night sky is so bright, it's as if the full moon is up every night. The US probably has less than 15 years left before the last of its dark skies are gone too. We're lucky here in New Zealand. Parts of the north and most of the South Island are still free from the glare of artificial light. Tekapo has been named 4th best place in the world to go stargazing. They've made a bid with UNESCO to declare their night sky a World Heritage Starlight Reserve. They've already got strict controls on outdoor lights, our country's biggest telescope, and mostly clear nights, so they receive quite a few astro-tourists already. So let's say you're in Tekapo, or maybe just the Greater Waikato, on a clear moonless night. You've got your DSLR camera, wide-angle lens, and a tripod. First, take some test shots to see the composition, check focus, and work out how long you can shoot before the stars trail. The wider your lens, the longer this will be. To keep your camera still, use the timer to start the shot, and you might end up with something like this first image. Even at the top of the Raglan divvy, with the camera pointed nearly straight up, the sky glow of Hamilton is apparent. Increase the contrast, and you get the image on the right, which looks decent here, but only because it's scaled 15 times smaller for the slide. Looking at the full-size photo, you'd notice that it's now covered in grainy noise. Now, if you've worked with film, you know about the problem of grain. The more sensitive a film is to light, the more it has a grainy effect. Noise is the digital equivalent, due to electric distortions on the sensor itself, and you can see it in these brightened lens cap shots. How to get around this? You could just turn down the sensitivity and expose for longer to let in more light, but then the stars will streak into lines. You could use a device that slowly moves the camera to compensate for the rotation, then expose for as long as you need. Tracking mounts range from DIY with crank handle to motorised that lock onto guide stars. Long exposures with tracking mounts is a must if you're shooting through a telescope, but for our wide-angle shot of the Milky Way, there's an easier solution. Photo stacking combines shorter exposures of the same scene, giving the effect of a long exposure. Many photos taken one after the other are aligned and averaged. Whatever isn't common to each photo must be noise, and the more images you stack, the better the signal-to-noise ratio. But see in this close-up, it takes exponentially more stacked images to keep reducing noise. Here, I've stacked many photos of the Milky Way into one image, equal to a long tracked exposure. It's actually better because that would have heated up the camera and made noise. Instead, the noise has been averaged away, showing more detail, like the dark lane of interstellar dust through the centre of the galaxy. To get a better result, I could head somewhere even darker, higher up, and with less humidity, like this place. The Atacama Desert is as high as Ruapehu, but the driest place in the world. Probably the best night sky anywhere. Camping out here with camera gear is definitely on my list. That's the aptly named Very Large Telescope. The laser makes a glow in the atmosphere, basically a fake star, used to compensate for air distortion, making for even sharper images. Here's one. They exposed for about half an hour to capture the Helix Nebula, also known as the Eye of God. This giant cloud of gas is hidden from the naked eye because it's really faint. If it were a few times brighter, we'd just be able to make it out under a dark sky, as big as the full moon. But our black and white night vision means we still wouldn't see these colours. You might recall the supermoon a few weeks ago. The full moon was as close to Earth as it gets. I took this through large binoculars, holding the camera lens against the eyepiece. As far as being super, it was actually less than 1% bigger than the previous full moon and only 6% bigger than the average. And the moon's so small in the sky that you never notice these changes. It's actually smaller than your little fingernail held at arm's length. This is the moon taken by a Spanish photographer through a telescope with 6 times more magnification. At this close, air distortion is the big problem. It's like looking through heat haze on a hot day. To average out all this movement, he stacked 1,700 photos on the left, then applied a sharpening algorithm 200 times to get the image on the right. Shooting the sun means limiting the light to prevent overexposure. Welding glass is the cheap option, but makes for poor quality green photos. I've got a solar filter, like tin foil, for the front of my binoculars to capture the transit of Venus across the sun next week. This was taken by a French photographer, and those aren't sunspots, it's a space shuttle servicing the Hubble Space Telescope. Back in '95, astronomers tried something for the first time. They pointed the Hubble telescope at a patch of sky that seemed almost completely devoid of stars. A patch of sky about the size of a grain of sand held at arm's length. They started their first exposure, and the particles of light began to arrive on the sensor one by one. After 10 days, the photos were stacked together to reveal something astonishing: the light from over 3,000 galaxies. Every single feature in this image is an entire galaxy. Each is a self-contained island of at least 100 billion stars. 8 years later, they did it again, with better optics, a darker patch of sky, and twice the exposure time. This peephole view out of our galaxy to the horizon of the universe this time came back with over 10,000 galaxies. Just 6 generations after we invented photography, we've used it with photos like this to help push back the limits of time and space and reveal the truly vast reality in which we find ourselves. And with today's cameras, it's now possible to capture a little part of this yourself. Thanks.